Betrayal is not just an external event, it is an internal detonation. It does not simply break trust between two people. It fractures the image you had of yourself, of them, and of reality itself. In that fracture, something long buried begins to rise. This is the shadow, the hidden, rejected, or unexamined parts of your psyche that quietly shape your reactions, attachments, and fears. When someone betrays you, your first instinct is often to focus outward. You analyze their behavior, you replay their words, you question their motives. But beneath that mental storm, another process is unfolding. The betrayal pierces the persona, the identity you present to the world and even to yourself. You may have believed you were strong, self-sufficient, or emotionally detached. Yet betrayal exposes where you were dependent, where you were blind, where you overextended trust to avoid confronting your own insecurities. The shadow holds everything you refuse to see: your fear of abandonment, your hunger for validation, your suppressed anger, your need to feel chosen. When trust collapses, those hidden elements surge to the surface. Suddenly, you feel emotions that seem disproportionate, rage that shakes your body, jealousy that burns, grief that feels endless. These reactions are not signs of weakness, they are evidence of depth. They reveal how much of yourself was unconsciously invested. Often, betrayal hurts most where you were most unconscious. If you secretly doubted your worth, betrayal confirms your fear. If you feared being replaceable, betrayal intensifies that wound. The shadow amplifies pain because it carries old narratives, childhood wounds, past rejections, moments when you felt unseen. The present betrayal becomes a doorway into earlier layers of unprocessed experience. This is why betrayal can feel like a collapse of identity. You may question your judgment. How did I not see this? You may question your value. Was I not enough? In truth, what is being challenged is not your worth, but your illusions. You may have projected loyalty onto someone who never possessed it. You may have projected depth onto someone who could not meet it. Those projections shielded you from seeing both them and yourself clearly. When betrayal activates the shadow, it forces a confrontation with your own denied qualities. Perhaps you prided yourself on being endlessly forgiving. Now anger erupts, demanding recognition. Perhaps you saw yourself as emotionally independent. Now you confront how deeply you relied on their presence for stability. The shadow reveals that what you reject in yourself does not disappear, it waits. There is a dangerous temptation at this stage to suppress the shadow again, to numb the anger, to rationalize the betrayal, to rush into another connection to avoid sitting with discomfort. But suppression only deepens unconscious patterns. The power of betrayal lies in its ability to expose what has been hidden. If you resist that exposure, you repeat it. Facing the shadow requires radical honesty. It means admitting where you ignored intuition. It means acknowledging the subtle compromises you made to keep peace. It means recognizing the ways you betrayed yourself long before anyone else did. This realization can be humbling, even painful, but it is transformative. The shadow is not evil. It is unintegrated energy. Your anger, once acknowledged, becomes boundary, setting strength. Your jealousy, once understood, becomes clarity about your needs. Your fear of abandonment, once faced, becomes self-reliance. What once controlled you unconsciously becomes conscious power. Betrayal strips away innocence, but it replaces it with awareness. The naive trust that once left you vulnerable is replaced with discernment. You begin to see patterns sooner, You listen more carefully to discomfort. You no longer silence your inner voice to maintain connection. In this way, betrayal acts as an initiation. It drags the shadow into light, not to shame you, but to integrate you. The parts of yourself you once disowned become part of your strength. The anger you feared becomes protection. The grief you resisted becomes depth. The illusion that love requires self-sacrifice begins to dissolve. And as you sit with what rises, without denial, without projection, without escape, you begin to reclaim authority over your inner world, recognizing that the darkness you feared was never meant to destroy you, but to reveal the parts of yourself waiting to be acknowledged, understood, and consciously embodied within your becoming identity. Illusions are comforting architectures of the mind. They give structure to uncertainty, soften harsh realities, and allow us to move through life without constantly confronting its unpredictability. We build them around people, around love, around success, and most dangerously, around ourselves. An illusion is not always a lie in the obvious sense. It is often a partial truth inflated into certainty. It is what we hope is real rather than what is real. And as long as illusion governs perception, identity remains fragile. When betrayal, failure, or loss strikes, the first casualty is illusion. The person you thought would never hurt you does. The path you believed was guaranteed collapses. The version of yourself you felt secure in begins to tremble. This moment feels like destruction, because the mind equates stability with truth. But stability built on illusion is dependency, not identity. Illusions often form early in life. You learn who you are through reflection, through how others treat you, praise you, criticize you, or abandon you. To survive socially and emotionally, you construct a persona that earns approval or avoids rejection. You may see yourself as the loyal one, the strong one, the peacemaker, or the independent one. These roles become masks that feel authentic because they are rehearsed repeatedly. Over time, you forget that they are adaptations rather than essence. The illusion persists because it works until it doesn't. When someone betrays you, for example, it shatters not only your image of them, but also your image of yourself. If you saw yourself as someone who always chooses the right people, betrayal confronts that illusion. If you believed love meant unconditional endurance, the pain forces you to question whether endurance was actually self-neglect. Illusions must die because they prevent integration. They split you into what you present and what you suppress. If you see yourself as endlessly kind, you may deny your anger. If you see yourself as rational, you may suppress your emotional needs. These disowned aspects do not disappear. They accumulate in the unconscious, shaping behavior in subtle ways. Identity cannot be whole while parts of you remain rejected. The death of illusion is disorienting. It feels like standing in an empty room after the walls have collapsed. You may ask, if I am not who I thought I was, then who am I? This question is not a crisis, it is a threshold. Real identity does not emerge from fantasy or projection. It emerges from confrontation with truth, with contradiction, with vulnerability. When illusions die, perception sharpens. You begin to see others without romantic exaggeration or fearful distortion. You recognize patterns you once ignored. You notice when someone's actions do not align with their words. More importantly, you begin to see yourself without protective narratives. You admit where you ignored intuition. You acknowledge where you compromised boundaries to preserve connection. This clarity can feel harsh at first. Illusions are warm, truth is cold. Illusions provide immediate comfort. Truth requires endurance. But truth offers something illusion never can: solidity. When you see clearly, you choose consciously. You relate without fantasy. You love without self-erasure. You stand without needing to be constantly affirmed. Identity is not constructed from what survives scrutiny. It is constructed through scrutiny. Every illusion that collapses removes a layer of distortion. The identity that remains is less dramatic, less performative, but more grounded. It does not depend on others behaving a certain way. It does not require constant validation to feel secure. It is rooted in awareness rather than expectation. There is also grief in this process. You grieve the fantasy of who you thought someone was. You grieve the future you imagined. You grieve the simpler version of yourself who believed unquestioningly. That grief is not weakness. It is acknowledgement that something significant has ended, and endings create space. As illusions dissolve, responsibility increases. You can no longer blame ignorance. You can no longer hide behind naivety. Awareness demands action. New boundaries, new standards, new ways of relating. The identity forming in this space is deliberate. It is chosen rather than inherited. Illusions die painfully because they feel like protection. But what they protect is not your essence. They protect your fear of confronting complexity. When they fall, you encounter yourself in raw form, contradictory, imperfect, evolving. This encounter is the birthplace of authenticity. Without illusion, you are left with truth. Without projection, you are left with perception. Without fantasy, you are left with choice. And in that space, stripped of comforting distortions and inherited narratives, identity begins to take shape through clarity, self-recognition, and the courage to stand in what is real rather than what once felt safe. Projection is one of the most subtle psychological mechanisms shaping human relationships. It occurs when you unconsciously attribute your own qualities, desires, fears, or wounds to another person. Instead of recognizing these traits within yourself, you see them reflected outward. In relationships, this process can feel magical at first. You meet someone and believe they embody everything you value: loyalty, strength, depth, integrity. But often, what you are truly recognizing is your own inner landscape mirrored back through perception. When betrayal happens, projection collapses. The image you constructed no longer matches reality. The loyal figure reveals dishonesty. The strong presence shows inconsistency. The depth you admired feels shallow. This moment is disorienting because it feels like something precious has been taken from you. In truth, what is happening is a psychological return. The qualities you placed onto them are coming back to their rightful owner. Projection begins as an unconscious act of displacement. If you are deeply loyal, you may assume others operate from the same principle. If you are emotionally intense, you may believe others experience love with equal depth. This assumption is not naive in a simplistic sense. It is a reflection of how your psyche understands the world. You use your internal experience as a template for interpreting external behavior. In early stages of connection, projection fuels attachment. You see what you hope to see. You interpret ambiguous actions generously. You fill gaps in information with your own values. This is not deliberate deception. It is unconscious completion. The psyche dislikes uncertainty, so it supplies missing traits with familiar ones, your own. The danger arises when projection replaces observation. Instead of responding to who someone actually is, you respond to who you believe they are. You ignore subtle inconsistencies because they disrupt the internal narrative. You defend them against criticism because criticism feels like an attack on your own ideals. The relationship becomes a stage where your inner qualities are played out by someone else. Betrayal shatters this arrangement. The moment reality contradicts projection, cognitive and emotional shock follow. You may think, how could they do this? But a deeper question emerges, how did I not see this? The answer often lies in projection. You were not seeing them clearly, you were seeing yourself reflected. When projection returns to its owner, it can feel humiliating. You may realize that the loyalty you admired was yours, the empathy you valued was yours, the consistency you trusted was yours. You were loving your own traits embodied through them. The betrayal forces you to reclaim what you unconsciously outsourced. This reclamation is transformative. Instead of searching for those qualities externally, you begin to recognize them internally. The admiration you once directed outward turns inward. You understand that the depth you crave in others exists within you. The integrity you expected is part of your own structure. The stability you longed for is something you must cultivate in yourself. Projection does not only involve positive qualities, it also involves disowned traits. If you suppress anger, you may accuse others of being aggressive. If you deny your capacity for manipulation, you may constantly suspect it in others. When conflict arises, projection intensifies. The qualities you refuse to acknowledge in yourself appear exaggerated in those around you. Betrayal can expose these darker projections as well. You may discover that your intense suspicion was rooted in your own fear of vulnerability. You may realize that your jealousy mirrored your own insecurity. As uncomfortable as this awareness is, it is liberating. When projection returns, you regain psychological energy that was scattered. Owning projection requires radical honesty. It means asking, what did I see in them that actually belongs to me? What did I accuse them of that reflects my own hidden tendencies? This inquiry is not about self-blame, it is about integration. When you reclaim projected traits, you become more whole. The collapse of projection sharpens perception. You begin to differentiate between who someone truly is and what you unconsciously attribute to them. You observe actions without filling gaps with fantasy. You allow people to reveal themselves gradually instead of completing their character with your own values. As projection returns to its owner, relationships shift from unconscious mirroring to conscious choice. You no longer seek someone to carry your disowned strengths. You embody them. You no longer demonize others for traits you secretly fear in yourself. You acknowledge complexity within your own psyche. This process can feel like loss because projection often sustains romantic intensity and emotional fantasy. But what replaces it is clarity. The energy once invested in maintaining illusions becomes available for growth. You stand less enchanted, but more grounded, and as you reclaim the qualities you once scattered outward, you begin to understand that the power you believed lived in someone else was always rooted within you, waiting to be recognized, integrated, and consciously lived without distortion or unconscious displacement into another figure, who could never truly carry what belonged to your own unfolding identity. Pain is often treated as an interruption, an obstacle to happiness, something to numb, escape, or silence as quickly as possible. Yet psychologically, pain is not merely a disruption, It is a summons. It calls you inward. It demands attention. It strips away distractions and forces confrontation with what has been ignored. In this way, pain becomes the threshold to individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, separate from conditioning, expectation, and unconscious patterns. Individuation does not begin in comfort. Comfort sustains adaptation. When life flows smoothly, you continue operating through familiar roles and identities. You remain who you have always been because nothing challenges that structure. Pain, however, destabilizes identity. A betrayal, a failure, a loss, or a rejection cracks the framework of who you thought you were. The reliable relationship ends. The career path collapses. The image of certainty dissolves. What remains is disorientation. This disorientation is not accidental, it is initiatory. Pain dismantles the false self, the persona constructed to survive socially and emotionally. You may have identified as the strong one, the successful one, the caretaker, the agreeable partner. When pain strikes, those roles may no longer function. You cannot fix a betrayal through people pleasing. You cannot achieve your way out of grief. The strategies that once defined you become ineffective. In this collapse, something deeper begins to surface. Emotions long suppressed rise into awareness. Anger you never allowed yourself to feel becomes undeniable. Fear of abandonment reveals its grip. Dependency, insecurity, envy, and longing emerge without disguise. These elements belong to the shadow, the aspects of yourself that remained unexamined while you maintained external stability. Individuation requires integration of these shadow elements. Without pain, they remain hidden. Pain forces recognition. It confronts you with your contradictions. You may see how you tolerated less than you deserved. You may recognize patterns repeated across relationships. You may understand how you abandoned yourself to avoid conflict. These realizations sting because they challenge your narrative of innocence or control. Yet pain is precise. It exposes exactly where growth is required. If rejection devastates you, it reveals how deeply your worth depended on external validation. If betrayal destroys your sense of safety, it shows where you anchored identity in another person's behavior. Each wound illuminates a psychological dependency. Awareness of that dependency is the first movement toward autonomy. Individuation involves separating from collective expectations and inherited identities. Many people live according to what family, culture, or peers expect. They adopt values without questioning them. They pursue paths that earn approval rather than authenticity. Pain disrupts conformity. When something collapses, you are forced to ask what truly matters to you, independent of external pressure. There is also solitude in this process. Pain isolates because transformation is internal. Others may offer comfort, but the confrontation with your own psyche is solitary. In solitude, you begin distinguishing between what you genuinely desire and what you were conditioned to want. You notice which parts of yourself feel alive and which feel performative. Pain deepens perception. After significant suffering, your awareness sharpens. You sense insincerity more quickly. You recognize emotional patterns earlier. You understand your limits. What once felt acceptable now feels intolerable because consciousness has expanded. This expansion is not pleasant, but it is empowering. Importantly, individuation does not mean becoming detached from emotion. It means relating to emotion consciously. Instead of being overwhelmed by anger, you examine its source. Instead of drowning in grief, you allow it to inform you about attachment. Instead of denying fear, you explore its roots. Through this dialogue with your inner world, identity becomes self-authored rather than reactive. Pain also dismantles illusion. You can no longer maintain fantasies about who people are or who you are. Reality intrudes. This intrusion can feel cruel, yet it grounds you in truth. Identity built on truth is stable because it does not depend on denial. As you move through pain rather than around it, resilience forms naturally. Not the brittle resilience of emotional suppression, but the grounded resilience of self-knowledge. You trust your perception more. You honor your boundaries. You choose relationships and paths deliberately rather than impulsively. The gateway of pain is narrow because it demands surrender of who you thought you were. To step through it is to relinquish old narratives, familiar defenses, and comfortable illusions. What emerges on the other side is not a perfected self, but a more integrated one, aware of light and shadow, strength and vulnerability, independence and need, capable of standing in complexity without collapsing into denial or dependency as the ongoing process of becoming continues to unfold within your conscious participation. Detachment is often misunderstood. It is confused with indifference, emotional coldness, or withdrawal. But conscious detachment is not the absence of feeling. It is the presence of awareness. It is the ability to experience emotion without being ruled by it, to care without clinging, to love without losing yourself. True power begins the moment your inner stability no longer depends on external behavior. Most people attach unconsciously. They attach to validation, to attention, to consistency from others. They attach to being chosen, to being needed, to being admired. These attachments quietly dictate behavior. You tolerate disrespect because you fear abandonment. You overextend yourself because you fear losing approval. You silence your truth because you fear conflict. What feels like love or loyalty is often dependency in disguise. Conscious detachment begins when you notice these dependencies. It requires observing your emotional reactions without immediately obeying them. When someone withdraws and anxiety rises, detachment allows you to feel the anxiety without chasing reassurance. When someone criticizes you and the defensiveness ignites, detachment allows you to pause before reacting. This pause is power. It interrupts compulsion. Powerlessness stems from emotional reactivity. If someone can control your mood with a text, a glance, or silence, they hold influence over your internal world. You may believe they are powerful, but the real issue is unconscious attachment. Conscious detachment reclaims that influence. It shifts your center of gravity inward. This does not mean you stop caring. It means you stop begging reality to match your expectations. You allow people to reveal themselves without trying to edit their character. You observe patterns without forcing explanations that make you comfortable. When someone shows inconsistency, you register it. When someone crosses a boundary, you respond rather than rationalize. Detachment also transforms desire. Instead of needing someone to complete you, you choose them because you appreciate them. If they leave, you feel grief, but not collapse. Your identity remains intact because it was never fused with their presence. This is not emotional numbness, it is emotional maturity. Many fear detachment because they associate it with loneliness. They believe attachment equals connection. But unconscious attachment breeds anxiety, jealousy, and control. Conscious detachment creates space for authentic intimacy. When you are not clinging, you can see clearly. When you are not Desperate for validation, you can evaluate compatibility realistically. Detachment requires confronting fear, fear of abandonment, rejection, insignificance. These fears often originate early in life and become embedded in relational patterns. Conscious detachment does not deny these fears, it acknowledges them without surrendering authority. You might feel the urge to text someone who seems distant, but instead you sit with discomfort. You might want to prove your worth when ignored, but instead you maintain silence. Each moment of restraint strengthens internal sovereignty. Power also emerges through acceptance. Detachment means accepting that you cannot control others' choices. You cannot force loyalty, honesty, or love. Trying to control outcomes drains energy and erodes dignity. When you release the illusion of control, you conserve psychological strength. You invest energy where it is reciprocated rather than chasing what resists. Conscious detachment sharpens discernment. You notice subtle shifts in tone and behavior without panicking. You recognize when effort is one-sided. You understand that not every connection is meant to continue. Instead of personalizing every disappointment, you contextualize it. Some people lack capacity. Some situations simply end. This clarity prevents unnecessary self-blame. There is also freedom in detachment. When your happiness is not tethered to unpredictable variables, you move with greater confidence. You speak honestly because you are not terrified of losing approval. You set boundaries because you value self-respect over temporary harmony. You walk away when necessary because you trust your ability to stand alone. Detachment refines love. It removes possession and replaces it with presence. You appreciate someone without trying to own their behavior. You support without sacrificing identity. You remain open without dissolving boundaries. The relationship becomes a choice renewed daily rather than a grip maintained by fear. Internally, detachment creates stillness. Emotional waves rise, but they no longer drown you. Praise does not inflate you excessively, and criticism does not shatter you. Your sense of self becomes anchored in values rather than reactions. You respond intentionally rather than impulsively. As you cultivate conscious detachment, you notice a subtle shift. You are less easily manipulated. Silence does not provoke panic. Mixed signals do not provoke obsession. You see dynamics for what they are. With that clarity comes composure. And in that composure, grounded in awareness rather than need, you discover a form of power that does not demand and control over others, but rests firmly in mastery of your own internal world, where presence replaces desperation and choice replaces compulsion. Within the steady architecture of self, governs strength,